Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Oh, it's quite a great rain, wonderful elemental experience. The sky is opening, filled with fire and water. So it's another great reminder of how we have a life that is built from patterns of natural change, and that when the elements are very, very strong, very powerful, very much not under personal control, it helps to remind us that we're not in charge of this life. We participate in it, but the elements are not under our personal control. I'm very glad that the roof is holding up as well as it is. A few little leaks, but otherwise we're well sheltered. So I'm glad we have that amount of control with respect to the elements at this time. I said I would speak a bit about the exit points from the bhava chakra, the cycle of becoming, the wheel of becoming, the cycles of addiction. And so I'll address these in a little detail this evening, but we also have the whole week together to explore these more in our own lives, in our own minds. So the first exit point is associated directly with the first noble truth, the experience of dukkha, dissatisfaction. Dukkha has already arisen from some cause or other, so there's the experience of discomfort, dissatisfaction that has arisen in our heart. And as I was quoting a few days ago, the Buddha said, this can, say, ripen in two different ways. The experience of dissatisfaction, where we are say, frustrated or irritated, we're frightened, we are lonely, we are insecure. There's that feeling, dukkha, dissatisfaction. It can ripen. It can say go in two different directions. So the one possibility is by identifying with that, attaching to that dukkha, we then just keep repeating the same habit. Again, we go back to try and find some kind of satisfaction, and we take another spin around the cycle of rebirth. We try to find another thing to bring satisfaction, a thing to make us feel comfortable again. Another spoonful of honey, another degree, another book to publish, another relationship to get into, or another relationship to get out of, another teacher to join up with, another teacher to get rid of, whatever it might be. So we go around and around the vata samsara, the wheel of birth and death. So that's the one option. The other option, as I mentioned, the Buddha called search. And when he speaks about that in this particular teaching, he says, there must be some way, some thing that can be done. There must be some means whereby this feeling of dukkha can be transcended. It can be let go of. Now, what is the way? So that's the search. So that is, in a way, representing the quality of saddha, or faith, confidence that this experience of dukkha, it's not an absolute reality. It's not something permanent. It's an arisen experience, and not everyone has the same experience. So there has to be a way that in this life, in this mind, that same experience can be avoided, can be let go of, can be transcended. In a more detailed teaching, the Buddha follows this up, and this teaching is known as transcendent dependent origination. And when it's described, it starts off in the usual way of ignorance conditioning, sankhara conditioning, vijnana, and so on, the usual pattern of links. But when in that description, this particular sutta, when it gets to dukkha, then just as it's saying, say, craving conditions, clinging conditions, becoming conditions, birth conditions, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, dukkha, then it goes on immediately that dukkha conditions faith, saddha. And so you might think, how is that? Well, I just told you how. It's that when that dukkha is say related to in a skillful way, rather than just grasping hold of it, resenting the feeling of suffering and dissatisfaction, the mind reflects upon that. So in the first noble truth, just as we've been describing in the reciting in the Dhammacakka Sutta, idang dukkhaṃ, this is dukkha. This is the experience of dukkha. So the mind is not lost in it, it's not wallowing in it, it's naming it. This is an experience. And in that, each of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha describes a way in which it should be handled, a means of working with it. And the way to handle the first noble truth, dukkha, is parinyayanti. So parinya is a familiar word to Thai people for a university degree, parinya ek, parinya do, parinya tri, right? So study. So we study the experience of dukkha. Dukkha should be studied. It should be, understood, acknowledged, apprehended. Okay, what is this? How does this work? So that parinya is the Buddha's advice. Study this experience of dukkha, and then that's what the doorway to liberation. And then later on in that same first section, in the Udapadi section, parinyayanti, it should be studied parinyatanti. It has been studied, it has been understood, it has been apprehended, it's been it's known. So that when dukkha is handled in that way, that's when it leads to faith. Dukkha conditions faith. If it's just rejected, we try to avoid it and blot it out, or we grasp hold of it and wallow in it, get lost in it, then we just repeat the cycle. But when dukkha is met with parinya, when there's a studying and exploring, investigating, really receiving it, understanding it, then that gives rise to faith. There has to be a way beyond this. And so then that faith then leads to pamoja, pramod in Thai language, which means delight or a sense of satisfaction, a kind of yes feeling. Pamoja is a kind of a comfort or with the way things are, so that there's different ways we can describe that, but that's the result of faith. Faith leads to pamoja, pramod, and that leads to piti or joyfulness, like, yes, there is a way out. So it's in a way the emotional result of that insight. There has to be a way, and then the insight, the intuition arises from the heart. Yes, you're right. Like, oh, great. So pamoja is that great, yes feeling. And then that ripens into piti or rapture, joyfulness, like, wow, this is marvelous. There is a way beyond this. So then piti then conditions kaya pasambati, which is the relaxation of the body, the physical relaxation, a physical ease. that then leads to sukha, contentment or profound happiness. Sukha then conditions samadhi, concentration. So, and as the Buddha says, the one whose heart is content, is at ease, then it's very easy for concentration to be established. That samadhi conditions insight, knowledge and vision of the way things are, yatha bhutang jnana rasanang, and that insight then conditions nibbida, coolness, and viraga, dispassion and detachment, a kind of sobering up, if you like, that, oh, this is the way things are. Everything is impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. Oh, right. So that viraga, nibbida, then is what we would describe in English as a letting go. There's a dispassion, there's a relinquishing, a releasing, also called vosagga, abandonment or letting go. And then that letting go results in the knowledge and vision of liberation, the vimutti jnana dassana. And so that started off in the same way with ignorance, coming to all the way through from craving to dukkha, but then that dukkha being handled skillfully, that leads to faith, and this whole extra part of the sequence leading to liberation. So that particular teaching is known as transcendent dependent arising. So it's a teaching many people have highlighted because it's in a way spelling out in detail how that skillful use of dukkha can lead to liberation. So I would call that the first exit point, is where dukkha has arisen already. It's like you've another way of describing it is you kind of been lost in some sort of state of excitement or fear or jealousy or aversion, and you suddenly realize that it's a painful state, like you've kind of woken up surrounded by broken glass and you've got no shoes on your feet. You know, oh wow, how did I get here? Okay, now here I am, surrounded by broken glass. I've got nothing on my feet. Now, what's the way forward? There has to be a way out of this. And so that I think, okay, I can take off my shirt, wrap it around my feet, and walk through the broken glass that way. There is a way forward. Not that any of us have necessarily had that experience. In my misspent youth, I have woken up in a bed with broken glass and the handle of a beer mug, a broken handle of a beer mug stuck into my back. I've still got the scar from that, on particularly wasted night. So I have a little bit of experience of waking up in the middle of broken glass. But that's the, in a sense, meeting dukkha and then finding a way forward. Yeah, that's a kind of an image that one can bring to mind in respect to that. So that's the first exit point associated with the First Noble Truth. The second exit point, what we're talking about in the Dhamma discussion this afternoon, that is the link between sort of stage 7 and 8, between Vedana and Tanha, between feeling and craving. So that's the weakest link of the chain, and what the Buddha highlights Tanha, craving, as the cause of dissatisfaction, of dukkha. And he names it, I feel, in the Four Noble Truths, because like this is the point to aim at. This is the weakest link. This, if you bring your attention here, then you can get to the root of the matter. So this is about learning to live with feeling, with a peaceful attitude. And again, the other day I was mentioning the teaching of the arrow, called the arrow, the Salla Sutta. And you find that in the connected discourses, the Samyutta Nikaya, in the chapter on the 6 senses, and I think it's Sutta number 6 so chapter 36, Sutta number 6, called the Salla Sutta, the Arrow Sutta. And just to remind you of that, because it's a very short teaching, but it's extremely helpful, meaningful. And many Western practitioners, people, therapists, doctors, people in pain management, I know this is a very important teaching. I've seen this quoted in print and by people in many different areas. And so it's a short teaching, but I would say extremely significant, definitely worth getting to know. So the Buddha often used images from military life. He was a soldier before he was a monk, so that there's a lot of military language in the Buddha's teachings, and so this is one of the instances of that. So the image is of a soldier on a battlefield, and the soldier is shot by an arrow, a sala, a lukson, in Thai language. And the Buddha said it's impossible to not be hit by the first arrow. The first arrow that the soldier is hit by represents physical pain. If you have been born, you have a body, you have a mind, necessarily there will be physical pain. That's unavoidable. So nobody escapes the first arrow. And the Buddha himself, as I mentioned, had chronic back pain when he was old. The beginning of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, he makes a statement, yeah, I'm 80 years old. My body's like an old cart, an old wagon held together with straps and strings and wires. The only way I can experience comfort is to completely absorb the mind into emptiness. So for the Lord Buddha himself, if he was paying attention to the sense world, he was in pain. We don't appreciate that necessarily, but the great master himself had chronic pain. So that was not the suffering that had come to an end with his full enlightenment. So nobody escapes arrow number one. So then arrow number two, that is avoidable, and that the second arrow he describes in his teaching, that is the negativity, the aversion, the fear, resentment, that say the cloud of irritation, agitation, and negativity the mind creates around that painful feeling. So that is completely avoidable. So the capacity that we have to distinguish between those two is really important. And so, particularly in meditation and a retreat situation like this is the ideal environment to get to know the difference between those two arrows, how there can be physical pain in our legs or back, or if you have a other kind of chronic pain or illness that produces that, we can explore that and find that, yes, indeed, there can be physical pain, but the mind can not turn it into a problem. But also, as I mentioned in the guided meditation, that doesn't mean to say that we have to be completely passive in relationship to that. And I feel it's very significant that there's a number of places, maybe 6, 7, 8 places, maybe more in the suttas. I've counted about 8 places where the Buddha is giving a Dhamma talk, and then he turns to Ananda or Mahakachana or Sariputta and says, Kachana, my back is paining me. The assembly is still wide awake. I'm going to go and lie down and stretch my back. You carry on giving a Dhamma talk. So the Buddha would stop giving a talk and hand over the Dhamma seat to one of his disciples so he could go and stretch his back. So he's the Lord Buddha. He's incapable of suffering, but he's still taking steps to relieve the pain in his body, because that's, let's say, affecting his experience. And so he's ready to take action to help relieve that pain out of kindness to the body. So, and as I again was mentioning in that guided meditation, if we bring an attitude of acceptance, a radical acceptance towards painful feeling, then there's the mind is at peace with that, then it doesn't mean to say that we can't change our posture, or we just have to be like passive in respect to that painful feeling. But if there's an attunement to the body and its limitations, then from that attunement, that mindfulness and wisdom of appreciating the body, there can be the recognition, just like the Lord Buddha saying, I'm going to go and stretch my back, carry on giving the teaching. There's a recognition of, oh, this is all the strain that my knee can take. Now, out of kindness to my knee, it's time to change the posture. So not out of aversion, not out of impatience or resentment, but out of kindness to the body, out of an awareness of the limitations of the body, then the posture is changed, based on mindfulness and wisdom, not based on me being fed up or worried or agitated. So it's a big difference. And if we change the posture based on mindfulness and wisdom rather than on aversion and fear, then the result of that change is not just relief for the body, but the mind is in that moment creating causes for peacefulness. Whereas if we move out of restlessness and agitation, aversion and fear, then we're creating the causes for more agitation, more dukkha. So the second exit point is learning how to be with feeling and not letting it give rise to craving. So far I've been talking about painful feeling, that the arrow is not about enduring pleasant feeling, it's about enduring painful feeling. And it also, in that sutta, it only talks about physical pain, but I would say if we learn how to work with that, with the physical pain, that translates quite directly into emotional pain, grief, the death of a loved one, a marriage breaking up, being fired from your job or your business collapsing, your book being refused by the 25th publisher, all the things it can produce emotional pain in our lives, many and various, that is exactly the same. We can recognize, well, this is the feeling of grief. This is the sadness of rejection, of that which was once beautiful is now broken, it's died. Here it is. It's still painful as an emotional pain, but the mind is not making a problem out of that. So it's also pleasant feelings. So feelings of excitement or stimulation, that you smell something that is attractive, beautiful fragrance of a flower or the fragrance of food, like, what have they cooked today? Or a sight that's very pleasing, very attractive, someone's physical form or a beautiful color of someone's clothing or a beautiful image, so that the feelings of pleasure, of sense pleasure, of kama raga can arise, but the mind doesn't have to get lost in that, so that there can be that pleasant feeling, there can be the experience of liking. That is delicious. That it smells lovely. That's a beautiful sight. That's appealing. But we don't have to add anything onto that. We don't have to suppress it or fear it or hate it, but we don't have to add anything to it. So we can like, but not chase after. We can dislike and not contend against or resent. So a story I often tell in this respect is one that Luang Por Sumedho recounted many times from when he was as a young bhikkhu at Wat Pah Pong. And those of you who listened to some of the Dhamma talks from our Luang Por Sumedho 90th birthday gathering at Amaravati 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's 3 weeks already now. But many of the stories that the Ajahns, both the Western Ajahns and the Thai Ajahns, told were about the austere conditions at Wat Pah Pong and the branch monasteries, back in the good old days. There's lots of descriptions of food, lots of the challenging quality of the food. Luang Por Chah was very proud of the fact that Wat Pah Pong had the worst food in the world. And if it got too delicious, he would go and scold the mechis in the kitchen. So anyway, life at Wat Pah Pong was very very plain, very austere, and there was a very strict separation of the junior monastics and even most of the senior monks from the lay people, and certainly there's a very strict division between the nuns community and the monks community. So, but in those days, Ajahn Sumedho was a very new bhikkhu, and he was the only Westerner in the monastery. And so there was these kind of local stories. Is it true there's an American, a huge white American, who's a monk at Wat Pah Pong. No, it can't be true. Yes, there is. There's a big white American. It's like, he's huge. So this kind of legends of this foreigner thing, staying at Wat Pah Pong, but life is so tough there. Can't possibly be true. And no Westerner could possibly stand living at Wat Pah Pong. Yeah. Anyway, so Ajahn Chah was quite protective of the young Bhikkhu Sumeto, but occasionally he would invite him to come and meet with the groups of people who came to visit because of the saddha, the faith, inspiration. They would get, wow, it's true, it's an American monk here at Wat Pah Pong. So on this one occasion, there was a group of the nursing students from the college, the nursing college in Ubon, and the staff would bring the student nurses out to Wat Pah Pong, once a term, I think, to receive teachings from Luang Por Chah. And so on this occasion, he had the young Bhikkhu Sumeto sitting with him. And so there's like a group of them, 50 or 80 teenage nursing students, all in their kind of white and turquoise uniforms, and very smart and very proper. And the senior nurses, the matrons and staff nurses who are their teachers. But being that close to that many young female people was very, very rare for the young Bhikkhu Sumeto. And after the group had come and Luang Por Chah had given them teachings, then and they had paid their respects and departed. Then he turned to the young Bhikkhu Sumeto and said, "So Sumeto, what did that do to your mind?" It was very straightforward. In Isan, in northeast Thailand, the matters of sex, death, procreation, defecation, body functions are all very very matter-of-fact subjects of conversation, very, very straightforward, very uju, kind of direct. So he just asked the young Bhikkhu Sumeto, "So Sumeto, what did that do to your mind, being, sitting close to 60 or 80 young women?" And then the way he responded impressed Luang Por Chah very much. He said, "I like, but I don't want. Chok, then my ow." And so Luang Por thought, "Oh, okay, this boy is going to go places." He was very impressed, and apparently, of course, I wasn't around then. I was still only about 10 years old. But Luang Por Chah apparently was so impressed with that response that for the next 2 or 3 weeks, it came up as a phrase he used in many Dhamma talks and giving guidance, that this is acknowledging, yes, there's a feeling of attraction, that there's, you have a very austere life. Life is very, very plain, and then here's a whole group of people that are attractive, and so you feel attracted. Yes, like if you're hungry and there's food, you feel interested because you're hungry. It's a natural function, but also recognizing that there is liking, but you don't have to follow that. You don't have to make anything of that. And so Chok Den Mai Ao became a theme for Luang Por Chah's teachings. So this is really useful advice, because sometimes we can get the impression that, as a Buddhist practitioner, we should never dislike anything, any kind of aversion. Oh no, you shouldn't have aversion. You should have loving kindness and be and have no aversion at all. Or you should never have any kind of pleasure. You shouldn't get any feeling of desire or attraction. It's wrong and bad. If you're a Buddhist, you should never want anything. And so if we have that in mind, life is going to be very difficult, because dislike and like arise because of the senses. If you have something that it's got a very bitter taste, or is really really rotten, if you put it in your mouth, there's a feeling of disgust. Ugh, that's disgusting. You can't pretend that it's not disgusting, because it is. It's not likable. Or if you've had a headache for 3 days, you can't pretend, "Oh, hooray, I really like this headache. It's been here for 3 days. I hope it goes on." That's not the way we relate to that. It's not likable, but we can not create aversion around that. We can, as was talked about in the Q&A, we can not dwell in aversion. I think you were using that, quoting Luang Por Sumeto in that phrase. We can not dwell in aversion. So similarly, we don't need to be afraid of liking. If you're hungry and there's food in front of you, it's natural to go, ooh, to feel attracted, to be interested. Or if another person who is sexually appealing to your particular considerations, then you see that person and the mind goes, ooh, that's natural. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to hate yourself because of that being there. You just recognize this is attraction. It's like this. It's liking, but so what? And if we are wise and mindful, then those feelings of like and dislike, we know them, we feel them. We don't have to be afraid of them. We don't have to suppress them. We don't have to pretend they're not there. But rather we can know, oh, this is the experience of dislike. This is disliking. It's this way. This is the experience of liking. It's this way. So in this, we are breaking the chain at Vedana. So there's the feeling is there, but it doesn't condition tanha. The mind is not crossing that bridge between Vedana and tanha, between sensation and craving. And so the more that we are able to do this, then the more that there's the heart can say transcend and break free of that cycle of the bhavachaka, the wheel of becoming. So that's the second exit point. So that's associated with the second noble truth, the cause of dukkha, tanha being the cause of dukkha. There's a lot more that could be said about that, but that's enough to be going on with, I think. Yeah. That and also that maybe the last thing to say on that is that one of the statements that Luang Por Chah would make very often is chok, my chok, tau tau gan. Liking and disliking are of equal value. We can learn from both of them. And so that we are getting what we want or not getting what we want, if that mind handles them skillfully, then wisdom can develop from both liking and disliking. So they can be a source of learning, a source of wisdom. So the third exit point, I would say, as was also came up this afternoon in the Dhamma discussion time, is right at the beginning. So it's a sort of link number one at avijja, in a way, just before that. So when there is vijja, the more that the mind can be established in awakened awareness, then that whole process does not arise. There's still seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, but the mind is not giving a false sense of solidity to the feelings of here and there, subject and object. It's not giving a false solidity to sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. The mind knows the experience of the world as empty, as sunya. So this is a very subtle kind of awareness, and it's easily disrupted. That's why we need to practice so much. But it is possible, and so that many of you who've listened to Luang Por Sumedho's Dhamma talks in recent years will know that he focuses upon this almost to the exclusion of everything else. Just be awake, wake up, wake up, wake up, be awake, be aware, and that the more that the citta, the heart, can be established in this quality of awakened awareness, then the whole cycle of trouble does not begin. The catastrophe does not get caused. So that this is a challenge, but it's in a way that, as I was saying this afternoon, dukkha nirodha. It's like the restraining of the causes for dukkha. So it's not just dukkha has begun and now it comes to an end, but dukkha nirodha also means the non-arising of dukkha. And also in Luang Por Sumedho's teachings in past years, he would say things like, actually, there isn't really any dukkha. We just think there is. It just seems to be that way. But really, it's just the wrong handling, the wrong understanding of a particular pattern of experience. If it's seen and known clearly, then it's recognized there is no dukkha. It's just the Four Noble Truths are not absolute truths. They're noble truths in that they are conditioned experiences, but they lead towards transcendence. They lead towards liberation. That's why they're called noble. So when people say all life is suffering, that the Buddha taught, everything is suffering, and they hold it to mean that everything is miserable and is always going to be that way. And as soon as you acknowledge that, then the better. And in the West, in the early days, that was a frequent misunderstanding of the teaching about dukkha. So it doesn't mean the Buddha saying there is dukkha. It's not saying that's an absolute truth, but rather we experience this from time to time. There is the experience of incompleteness, of dissatisfaction. And so it's not an absolute truth, but it's a relative truth. And if it's understood in a skillful way, it leads towards liberation. So hopefully that difference, distinction, it can be understood by people here, that it's not an absolute reality, but it's just how things appear. I am unhappy. I'm experiencing dissatisfaction because of the wrong understanding of this experience. So sometimes Luang Por Sumedho would say that there is no suffering, really. And in those of you who have studied, say, Northern Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, or read some of the works of Ajahn Buddhadasa's translations of Huangpo and Huineng, in those Zen teachings from China and from Japan, then they refer a lot to what is called the Heart Sutra, and in that it says there is no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation, and no way. There is no understanding and no attainment, because there is nothing to attain. And so it's some people might feel, well, that's really heretical. That's a wrong understanding. The Buddha said there is suffering, but what it's pointing to is that from the most profound perspective, there isn't really any suffering. There isn't really any origin. There isn't really any cessation or path. Those are relative truths. But ultimately, if it's seen with perfect clarity, there really isn't any dukkha. That these are all things that are samuti satcha, conventional truths. It may be also referring to the northern Buddhist tradition. In the Tibetan Buddhist world, this kind of practice of focusing just on the establishment of vijja, of awakened awareness, in the Tibetan language, that's called, the word for vijja is rigpa, and avijja is ma-rigpa. And so in certain forms of meditation in the Tibetan tradition, one called Mahamudra, another one called Dzogchen, the practice revolves around the establishment of the heart in that awakened awareness. And so it's not based on a particular techniques for concentration or any kind of methodology, other than as Luang Por Sumedho has been saying a lot in recent years, be awake, wake up, be awake, wake up. And so that the more that the mind embodies that quality of awakened awareness, the more that vijja is continuously established, then the more the heart is completely free of limitation. There's the quality of spaciousness, awareness, limitlessness, and radiance that are the natural attributes of the mind, free of greed, hatred, and delusion. So that third exit point is right at sort of link number 1. And so that's associated with the third noble truth of dukkha nirodha, or the cessation of dukkha, or the non-arising of dukkha. So when I was leading a retreat on dependent origination a few years ago, and I was talking about this and reflecting on it, I thought, well, each of these lines up with the first noble truth, second noble truth, third noble truth. So if we're going to link number 12, link 7 to 8, and then link number 1, so is there an exit point associated with the fourth noble truth, the Eightfold Path? And if so, how could it be before link number 1 as we're going 12, 7, 1? How can we get back before 1? So this is the kind of way my mind works sometimes. So I was looking at this, and I thought, well, uh, where does where does ignorance come from? What are the causes of ignorance? And so then reflecting on that, I thought, well, it's very rare in the suttas that the Buddha talks about the origins or the source of avijja, but he does in a couple of places. There's I think in the Samaditi Sutta, in the middle length discourses, he talks about the asavas, the outflows, as being the cause of ignorance. But in much more detail, in another of the discourses in the Book of the Tens, in the numerical discourses, the Anguttara, and this is Sutta number 61, if you want to look it up at some point. So then he goes through in detail where ignorance comes from. And so this is called the Ignorance Sutta, Avijja Sutta. And I think it's the only place in the whole Pali Canon where the Buddha spells it out. And so I feel this is very significant. So it starts off with the question. So what is the fuel? What is the source? What is the support for ignorance, for avijja? And then he says, well, it's the five hindrances, the nivarana, sense desire, ill will, dullness, restlessness, and doubt. The five nivarana, these are the fuel, the source, the support for avijja. And then he says, well, so what then is the fuel? What's the support for the five hindrances, the five nivarana? He says, well, it's the three kinds of unskillful action: unskillfulness in thought, unskillfulness in speech, unskillfulness in action. Those three are the source of the fuel. That's what feeds and supports the five nivarana, the five hindrances. And then he says, so what is the fuel? What is the source? What is the origin, the support for the three kinds of unskillful action? And then he says it's a lack of restraint with regards to the senses, indriya sangwon, indriya samvara. So, and in ordinary, so when, in English language, we'd say being reactive rather than responsive. So if you like something, you chase after it. You like and so you want, and you chase after it. You dislike, and so then you contend against it. You hate it. You resent it. You get rid of it. So that lack of sense restraint is the fuel for those three kinds of unwholesome thought, speech, and action. So a lack of indriya sangvara, indriya sangwon. So then he says, so what is the fuel, the support, the source of that lack of sense restraint? And then he says a lack of sati sampajanya. If the mind is not say awake and aware, there's a lack of mindfulness and clear awareness, and a lack of mindfulness and full awareness, then that's what makes us reactive rather than responsive. We're impulsive. We just follow our urges, our impulses in a blind and an unconscious way. Then he says, so what then is the fuel? What is the support? What's the source for that lack of sati sampajanya, mindfulness and full awareness? He says it's a lack of wise reflection, yoniso manasikara. There's an ayoniso manasikara, unwise reflection. So the mind dwells upon the things that it hates, the things that it complains about, the things that it fears and worries about, the things that it wants to get and get hold of. So that's unwise attention, ayoniso manasikara, unwise reflection or attention. So then he says, so what is the fuel? What's the source? What's the support for that lack of wise attention, that unwise attention? And he says it's a lack of faith, lack of saddha. If you don't have faith in something beyond material pleasure, and sense pleasure, or satisfaction through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, then there's no faith in any kind of spiritual quality. Then that's what feeds that that unwise attention, you focus on the things that create excitement or that you get upset about, you get worried about. So what's the support? What's the fuel? What's the support? What's the kind of what feeds that lack of faith? It's just not listening to good teachings, not paying attention to wise teachings. So not drawing close to Dhamma teachings and wise advice, not receiving spiritual advice that's helpful, that's liberating. And he said, what's the support? What's the fuel? What is it that is the cause for that lack of drawing close to wise teachings that makes you so distracted, wanting to kind of just amuse yourself or knock yourself out? And then he says, lack of good friends, not drawing close to good people. So that is the source, that's the root, that's the origin of the whole thing. So it's in the Book of the Tens, you've got, in this direction, it's only 9. Those of you who've been paying attention, that's only 9, Ajahn. How come it's in the Book of the Tens? Well, wait for a moment. So I'm not sure if any of you were counting, but so that's only 9 takes you. But he says that's the root. Sat purisa sangseva. So sat means good or true. Purisa is a person like purut. Sangseva is to draw close to. So not drawing close to good people, that's the root of the whole avijjo system. Then he gives this very beautiful image that just like the rain falls onto the hilltops and forms into little puddles, the puddles form into little trickles, the trickles form into ponds, the ponds form into bigger streams, the bigger streams form into rivers, and the rivers flow into the sea, and the sea is filled up. So too, ignorance is filled up by this whole causal chain, starting at not drawing close to good people, not having good friends, not having kalyanamitta. But if you draw close to good people, so I would say spending 10 days on top of this hill here in the beautiful surroundings of Chiang Rai province at Chaisai, if you draw close to good people, Sappurisa Sangseva, then that gives rise to that feeds, that supports the opportunity to hear good teachings, liberating teachings. So if you listen to good teachings, liberating teachings, that feeds the quality of faith, that sense of, oh yeah, there is something beyond material pleasure and physical comfort. So, and then that faith, that leads to wise reflection, yoniso manasikara. That wise reflection supports the quality of sati sampajanya, mindfulness and full awareness. Sati sampajanya feeds the quality and is the support for indriya samvara, restraint of the senses, or being responsive rather than reactive. So you see something that you like, you don't chase after it. You see something that you dislike, you don't have to reject it or fight against it. So that what I was saying about being say wise in relationship to feeling and perception. So when there is responsivity rather than reactivity, and I hope you can understand the difference between those two. When you're responsive, there's a bit of space around liking and disliking. So then that practicing sense restraint, indriya samvara, indriya sangwon, then that leads to, that supports the 3 wholesome qualities: wholesomeness in thought, wholesomeness in speech, wholesomeness in action. And then those kinds of wholesomeness, they support the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So we've gone a slightly different track here. So then they support the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana. So the 4 foundations of mindfulness then support the 7 factors of enlightenment. They're the fuel, the origin, the support for the 7 bojjhanga, the factors of enlightenment. And then the 7 factors of enlightenment, they are the support, they are the fuel for vimutti jnana dassana, the knowledge and vision of liberation. So that's 10 in that list. So you get 1 more in the positive direction. And in the same way, so just as the rain falls onto the hills and falls into the little puddles and the small streams, bigger streams, and so on, and the big rivers fill up the ocean, so too the knowledge and vision of liberation is filled up through this causal process. And at the source, at the origin, is Satpurisa Sangseva, drawing close to good people. So I take that as the 4th exit point of the cycle is making skillful choices, and it's a bit of it's not maybe directly related, but I would say that the Eightfold Path is all about the choices that we make in terms of our attitude, our mind training, our livelihood, our speech, our actions, and the decision-making process of our processes of our lives. And so you could, in that way, you can see that this is related to the fourth noble truth about making skillful choices in terms of our actions, our attitudes, and our livelihood, our mind, the way we work with our mind, and that if we draw close to good people, if we then set the conditions in place, then the tendency for ignorance to arise is much weaker. It doesn't have fuel. If you have a car and there's no petrol in the tank, it won't go. So if there's the potential for ignorance, but it's got no fuel, it won't arise. And so drawing close to good people and developing that Sappurisa Sangseva, that is the principal way that we create the conditions for ignorance to be starved of its fuel, for us to, in this way, put the conditions in place for wholesome and liberating qualities to arise in our lives. So choosing to spend 10 days up on this hill in this beautiful environment, I would say that's a very good example of Sappurisa Sangseva and the effects of putting the odds in our favor to starve ignorance of its fuel and to feed the quality of wisdom and liberation. So those is my version of the 4 exit points from the Bhava Chakra. A1.